Hello everyone, I am Amethyst El-Shami and I'm presenting with Brandy Reynolds, Bobby Nettle, and Tessa Kofeld, the presentation Ableism in the Workplace. To introduce the topic, we are going to define some names and keywords and acronyms before we get into the complexity of ableism in the workplace. So to begin with, ADA simply stands for Americans with Disabilities Act. Reasonable accommodation is an accommodation that an individual can request from any higher up, either it is manager or human resources, and that consists of making adjustments or improvements in the conditions of the work, and it allows the employee to perform their job despite their differences in abilities or differences in background or identity. The essential functions of the job are specific tasks from the job description that are essential for the job to be done. If you've looked at any job description, you might realize that there are some soft skills required and some essential skills that are required. An example of an essential function would be, for example, if you work in a clinical environment, the essential function could be administering blood to a patient, for example. A non-essential function would be interpersonal communication with coworkers. That is not essential to do your job. The interactive process is a process that requires the employee and the employer to communicate, to implement reasonable accommodations, and to monitor their progress throughout the time and upgrade if needed. The universal design is a broad concept that entails basically that any space, whether it is public or private, it is made accessible for anybody regardless of their background or identity, or race or gender or ethnicity or nationality, background or disability status, marital status. For example, the sidewalk is made accessible for people who have strollers or people who carry their groceries in a little bag with wheels, by doing the little depression on the side of the curve. Major life activity is anything that is necessary for humans to do in order to stay alive, such as speaking, breathing, eating, walking, moving, looking, hearing. What is causing ableism in the workplace? There are so many things that contribute into this. A lot of these ideas are unfortunately stemming from personal experience. An accommodation granted to an employee needs to be reasonable. There is no actual definition for what makes a accommodation reasonable. It just does not cause any undue hardship or burden on the employer. That's basically what makes an accommodation reasonable. But again, what makes that accommodation reasonable is going to vary from an institution to another and from a company to another. So the employee cannot predict if a particular accommodation that they imagine in their head is going to be reasonable for such company on the time that they submit their application. They have to disclose about their challenges during the interview or after the job offer. HR accommodations procedures don't always align with the ADA guidelines. My personal experience here is that some HR personnel suggest that they can only provide accommodations to individuals who have permanent disabilities. The ADA defines a person with a disability as a person who has a condition that substantially impairs its ability to do one or more major life activity, as I previously defined in the previous slide. So that person can either have a document to record that impairment, or it can also be regarded as having a disability. That impairment needs to be long term, and even if it could be temporary, but if it was for a very short duration, then that's not regarded as a disability. A temporary disability could be if it was spanning for several years, then that would be considered a disability. The interactive process takes a toll on the management. Now, unfortunately, this is also stemming from the lack of training of management in the disability field. Not everyone knows how to handle the legal aspect of disabled employees and giving them their rights. The interactive process is in the picture on the upper right. There are 6 steps for the interactive process, but that doesn't mean that it ends at step 6. It needs to be a continuous cycle. If the manager gets tired at step 5 and they decide to fire their employee before getting a chance to communicate to other personnel in the department about how the new accommodations are working, if they're not working out, if they're too expensive, if there's not enough time to implement them, that can potentially lead to harmful legal repercussions. Performance evaluation criteria may be unrelated to job duties and don't consider employees' abilities. Now, this is mostly relevant in institutions and companies that are big, the institutions that contain roughly about thousands of employees. When there is such a variety of employees and positions, the performance evaluation criteria is a lot easier to evaluate when they are the same for every employee, regardless of their position. So, with that, the performance evaluation criteria are not specific to someone's job description, which is unfair, and it may or may not consider the employee's abilities. The ADA does not protect every disabled person from losing their job. This is a true but unfortunate reality. The goal of the ADA is to make sure that disabled people have a chance to hold a job if they are able to perform the job with reasonable accommodation. If there is no reasonable accommodation that can help that employee to perform their job, then the ADA cannot protect them. For example, if I was a blind person and I wanted to drive a truck, the ADA cannot protect me because there is no reasonable accommodation that can resolve the blindness. Poor implementation of universal design. This is again due to the lack of training of institutions in general about what infrastructure makes things more accessible for people with different needs and different preferences.
Hello, so I will be talking about what makes it difficult for employers to provide reasonable accommodations. One of them being they're not very well prepared for providing accommodations, so they don't have the tools necessary. There's already limited staff resources for their existing employees, making it difficult for disabled employees as well. Another one would be no staff training for disability interactions, which could lead to frustrations with disabled staff. The other is there's a very high cost of the assistive technology that the business may not be able to afford for disabled staff. There's a lack of opportunities for disabled staff. And then anti-bullying training isn't a all-size-fits-all model. And then there is the equal opportunity bully manager who will bully you regardless of you are abled or disabled. some solutions. So a very good starting point is some guiding questions to ask employees and or employers or managers. The first being, does the employee have an impairment? This gives them the information on where to start. The second being, does the employee's impairment substantially limit the employee's major life activities? And the third being, what reasonable accommodation allows the employee to perform essential functions of the job? Those are all very important questions to ask at the start of the process. The other is establishing labs or lab incubators designed for those with disabilities in the STEM workplace. Building disability-related initiatives into grant proposals so it's more widespread. And then making documents, processes, and products available through universal design and assistive technology. And this gives disabled employees a lot more freedom in asking for their accommodations.
Sending employers to disability-related conferences to learn more about disabilities and accommodations. Conducting website accessibility reviews to make sure features are running properly. Providing training for issues like bullying and respect in the workplace. And recruiting people with disabilities to serve on advisory boards so they can give direction, advice, and suggestions.